It's described as a watershed moment in the United States. A number of powerful men fired after accusations of sexual harassment. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Over the last few months, there's been a reckoning in the United States involving sexual harassment in the workplace. In October, the New York Times published a report involving film producer Harvey Weinstein. It detailed decades of allegations of sexual harassment and assault from dozens of women against the movie mogul. In the weeks that followed, a number of powerful men, including Hollywood actors, executives, broadcast newsmen, and U.S. politicians, were fired or forced to step down because of allegations of sexual misconduct. And women voiced their solidarity through social media with the hashtag #MeToo. With sexual harassment dominating the headlines, we'll discuss if this is a new chapter for gender equality in the workplace here in the United States and around the world. Joining us now from New York is Shruti Kapoor. She's a gender equality activist and the founder of Sayfty, an organization dedicated to educating and empowering women. Also with us is Stella Amabilis. She's a fellow with the Leadership and Advocacy for Women in Africa at Georgetown University. From Providence, Rhode Island, we're joined by Matthew Gutmann. He's a professor of anthropology and director of the Brown International Advanced Research Institute at Brown University. And Caren Goldberg is an associate professor of management at Bowie State University and has written extensively on diversity, discrimination, and sexual harassment. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Caren, let me start with you. Now we have this huge debate in the United States because of these revelations over the harassment of women in the workplace. And that harassment, of course, takes different forms: exploitation, sexism, discrimination, and, of course, violence. In fact, Time magazine has just announced its Person of the Year. And the Person of the Year for 2017 is the Me Too movement. And it calls the women who came out the silence breakers. What do you think changed in the environment that enabled the women to come out and break their silence?
I think the primary issue is being believed, because whether it's in an organization or in society at large, women have been silenced because of fear of repercussions, and a lot of that fear stems from people aren't going to believe me, or they're going to believe the harasser or assaulter instead of me. And so with this onslaught of people saying me too, me too, me too, it has to some extent liberated women to say, yes, I will be believed if I voice an allegation myself.
Yeah, it still takes a lot of courage, even in this day and age, to come out and say that, isn't it?
It does, because ultimately, even if a woman is believed, it is not likely to benefit her a whole lot in the long term to voice such claims in the workplace anyway.
Shruti Kapoor, in New York, the harassment of women in the United States is now the subject of much debate, and it's, as we've just heard, encouraged many women to come out and speak out. Now, you've done a great deal of work on this issue in India, but what do you make of what is happening in the United States right now? Are you surprised that it's taken so long for this to come out?
I'm not surprised because, again, speaking and sharing your stories of sexual abuse it takes a lot of courage, and the victims and the survivors can take many, many years. And thanks to the Me Too movement now, it really is a movement and no longer a hashtag. We are seeing solidarity amongst survivors, and there is this encouragement and there is this strength that the survivors are getting from reading and sharing other stories. And so, you know, survivors have always shared their stories, but they've feared the repercussions of these stories. But the Me Too movement has today given them the strength to openly come out. And the more people share, the more we see other survivors sharing the stories around the world. So in a sense, I'm glad that this is happening now. It's never late to share your survivor stories.
Stella, let's talk about Africa. There is widespread violence against women in many parts of Africa, and much of it, in a very macabre, very distorted way, is justified on the basis of cultural tradition. So how much of a challenge is it not just to stop the violence that is taking place against women, but also to change what are very deep attitudes against women in Africa?
Thank you very much. Before I can say anything about sexual harassment, I'll look at it from the African perspective, because the definition of sexual harassment per se is the direct request, or what I would call the quid pro quo, where you ask for something and you're given something in return. Or there's this one where it's under a hostile environment. Here you don't want something, but it's happening to you. What do I mean by that? For example, like in the quid pro quo kind of situation, you have a boss who will tell you that, before you're promoted, you should first, give me your body or have sex with me, and then I'll be able to give you the promotion. Or, do this for me, that kind of thing, even when you're not willing. And then, of course, there are those situations whereby it's a hostile environment, and then you just have to, bear with everything. And the reason why many times the women accept certain things is just because they fear victimization, and they also fear the issue of stigma. Many women in Africa struggle to get these jobs. So you find that at the end of the day, when somebody gets a job, somebody wants to protect the job. I can give you an example of myself. Being in an institution where I am, because I work with the judiciary in Uganda. So like, I had a situation where I was being sexually harassed, but I tried to speak out, and my colleagues who were ladies, they were kind of against it. Why do I have to talk about it? But me being a woman activist, I could not stand and, watch such a thing going on. And of course, that affected a lot of things. And, they even had a meeting where they were saying I'm being insubordinate and all that kind of thing. So it's a very big issue in Africa. People fear talking, stigma, losing the job and all that kind of thing. And of course, some of these bosses we have are very powerful people. So it's very difficult. We are trying to come up with a forum where we want also the women to start speaking out the way it's done in the United States. But the number is still not a lot.
Right, that is the situation in the workplace. What about the situation at home? We often hear that African society is a patriarchal society where men are very dominant, that there is harassment, exploitation, abuse going on in the home.
Yeah, that is true. We are from a patriarchal society. The men are dominant. Of course, it's true. That one I don't need to deny it. But still, many women fail to come out. Why? Because of the issue of economic dependence on a man. You find that you cannot report a man, or you cannot take a man to court because, or have such matters taken to the police station because you fear you may lose your home, or even your in-laws, what they call the brothers-in-law or whatever. They will come up and they will, ask you why you're doing such a thing. So many times the women withdraw. Or even sometimes when you go to report such matters, many times the police are not ready to help you so much.
Yes, so go ahead.
I was going to just add in that it's a similar situation in Asian economy, especially in India, where, again, we have a very patriarchal system. A lot of young women and girls face harassment and sexual abuse at home, but they are never encouraged to openly talk about these issues because of the social stigma, taboo, and shame surrounding this particular topic. And for the same reasons that my colleague just mentioned, even if the victim gathers the courage to go to the police station to report, to file an FIR, first information report, the police is not, does not believe the victim. They will laugh at her, they will ridicule her, they will encourage her to go back and settle the matter at home. And so it's not just, the home, it's also the system that is broken, which is not gender sensitized, which is not believing the victim to encourage them to come out with, these, for reporting these abuses that are happening at home.
Okay, Matthew, let's talk about the United States. We have here the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who's got something of a reputation for making very vulgar statements about women, about making very disparaging comments about women. We heard that Access Hollywood tape, you will remember, during the election campaign. There, now the President, of course, is expressing doubts that it was his voice on the tape, and it's prompted someone who was with him at the time, a businessman called Billy Bush, to say this. Let's take a listen to what Billy Bush had to say.
By the way, if that's, I would also like to say that's not me on the bus. You don't get to say that because I was there in the last 14 months of my life. I have been dealing with it. You dealt with it for 14 minutes and went on to be the president.
So there we heard Billy Bush saying, you know, the president had to deal with this for 14 minutes and he went on to become president of the United States. But how much of a turning point was that? Did it embolden women to come out in the United States and start talking about this?
I think the issues of sexual harassment and sexual violence by men against women are obvious, as everyone has been speaking to. Nothing new, they're nothing unique to the United States, Africa, India. These are major problems that have existed for a long time. And the question is, why are women being listened to, if at all, now? Why is the Me Too movement having such a reverberating success at this time? And I think one of the key factors is that people felt so demoralized by the election of not just somebody who claimed that they would like to do these things, but somebody who'd been accused himself of sexual assault on multiple women. And he not only got away with that, but he was elected president. And the demoralization and the concern that people had, I think, has erupted now. And it's, in a real sense, the clash that's going on now in U.S. society, I think, is being mirrored elsewhere. Certainly, we have learned from India and the incident on the bus several years ago of a woman who was gang raped. These kinds of incidents become world news. They become important and stepping stones to doing something about it. We had a black president in the United States. This didn't solve racism in the United States, but it certainly was a step forward in a major way in terms of addressing issues of racism. Similarly, the Me Too movement is not going to overnight solve problems, but it's absolutely crucial that not only women, but men be supporting this at this time and finding ways to speak out.
Caren, if we look at Donald Trump, if we look at some of the other perpetrators of abuse against women, there is one common thread that runs through all of this, and that many of the men who've been accused of this are powerful men, very rich men. Given that, are we going to see accountability?
I would like to say that we're going to see accountability, but I think, as one of the other guests had alluded to, there are systemic problems that may interfere with that. I speak mostly to workplace issues. Internal to organizations, there simply aren't a lot of mechanisms for women to be believed as there needs to be, or at least to handle the onslaught that is likely going to, that the floodgates have opened as a result of the Me Too movement. I don't know that a lot of organizations are really prepared for that at this juncture in terms of having credible investigations, in terms of having multiple mechanisms for people to report, in terms of having policies in place that actually do implement disciplinary actions for people who have been found to have violated their organization's sexual harassment policy.
So we may have these situations that exist, Caren, but there are laws that are there to protect women in the workplace, aren't there?
There are laws, but the cards are somewhat stacked against plaintiffs in most employment matters. So a woman can can file a charge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but unless she has the resources to hire her own attorney, it's unlikely that that's going to go very far. The EEOC has been underfunded for, I mean, historically, but really dramatically since 2014. And with this expected onslaught of sexual harassment claims that's likely going to emerge as a result of the Me Too movement, the underfunding is only going to diminish the ability to handle each individual complaint effectively.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right now. More of our conversation about sexual harassment in the workplace right after that. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.